Alright everyone, today's video is going to be a little bit different than my typical content. It's going to be less about individual mechanics and building and, different interactions of things and the development process of Division 2. It's going to be more about the community's response to what they know about Division 2 so far. It's going to be discussing whether or not Division 2, as opposed to its prequel, Division 1, is more or less complicated, is more or less casual, and how the community is and will react to that fact. To really kick off the discussion, I want to display a selection of comments that were on my previous video kind of right next to each other, which was a really interesting thing to see. And I want to make it clear that I am not in any way attacking any of these people, nor should you, anyone that's watching this. The Division has a very bad reputation for community members treating each other poorly. And I do not want that to be the result of anything that happens on this channel. Okay? So these players are entitled to their opinion. I just thought it was very, very interesting the way they were displayed directly next to one another and how they had mutually exclusive and conflicting points of view. Here's the first one. I love how the Division 2 is literally making the same mistake Destiny 2 made. And to clarify really quick, Destiny 2 was widely criticized for making its experience way too casual and dumbing down a lot of the stats and just really stripping away features and making it a very simplistic linear experience. With appealing to everyone that doesn't play or isn't good at the first installment by dumbing it down and not appealing to their current audience and players that love the current Division. The Division 2 sounds horrible and looks horrible, so he's entitled to that opinion. He does not like what he's seen. There's nothing wrong with that. And the follow-up immediately after, finally someone with the same views. It's going to... I can't read some of this grammar sometimes. Finally someone with the same views going to cater for the casual player and ruin everything, realize they fucked up, and then have to wait 2 years for a decent game. LMAO. That's okay. He's entitled to his opinion. They're going to cater to the casual player, and the game is not going to be as good as the current version because of that fact. Both of these people are completely entitled to think that. I disagree, however. They think it's going to go the way of Destiny 2. And I did do an entire video about Division 2 saying it won't be like Destiny 2 because of that fact, because there are a lot of people that believe that it's such a closely related sequel. It's a looter shooter. I mean, it's being called D2. Destiny was called D2 as well. That's just an irrelevant similarity, but people are afraid that it's going to go the way of Destiny 2. So this comment perfectly highlights that. They believe that the experience is too dumbed down and too casualized, and thus they are not a fan of what they've seen for Division 2. Moving on, we have this comment here. The gear system is too complex. I don't want to spend hours trying to figure out what talents go with what gear to get my skills where is want them. More complex system of talent, gear, and loot is not always the best answer. I think the gear system was fine in the Division. If anything, the gear system just needed a few tweaks here and there. So this player agrees that they don't like what's being seen in Division 2, but for the exact opposite reason as the previous two players, citing that the gear system is too complex, not too casual, meaning that more hardcore players that are playing more hours of the day are understanding more, and it isn't catered towards them with maybe a limited knowledge of the game or just jumping in, and it's not friendly to the casual player. They're citing complexity being the issue rather than simplicity being the issue. And right next to each other, these comments are interesting to me. Moving on, we have a comment from Adam Victory. You make a lot of good points and I feel better about these changes. Thank you, Adam. I appreciate that. However, I've seen a talent buffing crit chance that requires crit damage to do so. This does two things. It removes an advantage an experienced player should have by forcing new players down a synergistic route, and simultaneously disables our ability to maybe stack crit chance / raw damage or go a different route altogether. I want as much freedom as possible, and some of these requirements seek to guide new players into good builds and restrict our ability to get creative and find an advantage. To be honest, I actually admire the brilliant solution they've found. I just don't agree with it. I really like this comment. That's very well articulated feedback right there. If all comments on YouTube look like this, it'd be a phenomenal place. But moving on, this is something that cites simplicity or guided synergizing compositions to decrease the advantage that experienced players have. So we're back on the train of the experience being too casual. It may not seem that way. You're going to have a lot of synergizing mechanics that line up in chains that you activate one at a time, and it may seem more complicated on the surface, but this is eliminating experienced player advantages, and he disagrees with it, which is totally okay. But again, we're going back and forth, and we're seeing all these different comments that are from perspectives that are mutually exclusive. They can't exist side by side. The game can either be more casual or it can be more complicated and more hardcore. It can't be both necessarily. It can be interpreted as both, which it clearly is because we don't have our hands on the game yet, but it can't actually be both. Jumping over, we have yet another comment. This one is a little bit more short, sweet, and to the point. Too complex, too many factors to keep in mind. Div 1 was great because you had the green arrow that showed you which is better in which area. So again, the elimination of casual kind of mechanics that helped, more casual players with less experience understand the mechanics, and a departure from that to the realm of more intense, more hardcore, more complicated. You see where I'm going with this. It flip-flops back and forth, and basically the comment section of all of my videos is just like this. It's side-by-side comments that are completely contradictory, and it seems that the community is honestly just confused about whether or not the game is going to be more complicated, more hardcore, and reward more critical thought, more theory crafting, more build mechanics synergies, or is it going to be something that's dumbed down, too casual, too easy? You just go in, it's got a linear path, you do it all, boom, done, you know what's coming, and there's really no options for individual customization. That seems to be the kind of back and forth that we've got going on. The last comment I have here, just for the sake of time, is like the developers said, they want us to construct a build to our playstyle. I like this idea because now it increases the build diversity rather than everyone running like Striker and Nomad. Overall, the Division 2 is going to require more skill and more thought about how you want to play and not just follow the meta. So again, we've got this flip-flopping back and forth impression that the community has, whether or not the game is going to be more or less complicated, whether or not it is more or less casual, whether or not there will be more or less build diversity, or how that's all going to work. So this video, in the end, now I'll start on that, is going to be me giving my thoughts and weighing in on that discussion. Here goes. Division 2 will have wildly increased build diversity and build customization options. However, does that make it more complicated? I guess is up to you. What it will do also, though, in tandem with increasing the amount of customization options and stats that we have at our fingertips, it will make a conscious and substantial effort to make that all more understandable. So while giving us more tools, they will make it easier for us to understand how those tools function. Let me put it this way. Before, in the Division 1, you had a whole bunch of complex interactions. Some of the damage was multiplicative. Some of it was additive. You had hidden multipliers for PvP. You had the way that talents would scale together. You had all these hidden interactions, and it really took a mathematical formula just to understand how much damage you were even going to deal. It took a whole bunch of complex calculations to understand which talent was better and why, and most of the talents were simply geared towards damage. So while the game is less complicated from the side of maybe you don't need a stats degree in order to understand how your character is going to function, it's more complicated in the sense that there are more options that mean something that you can choose from to make your character play differently, function differently, and suit it to your playstyle. So it's more complicated on a surface level of the options that matter and you can choose easily, and you can just interpret at face value after reading their little blurb in their description. And it's less complicated in the sense that you don't have to dive into all these super detailed, complex things where you have to test them, 6 ways to Sunday before you even understand what the talent or what the skill is doing and the different ways that it interacts with the other skills. It's less complicated to a degree, but it's more complicated in an understandable way of things that actually will impact you, in a simplistic way of I add this talent to this talent and I am stronger, instead of I add this talent to this talent because they're two different types of, damage multipliers. They interact in a way where I actually get, instead of 45%, like the old Sentry, you would get 15, 15, 15, but it was multiplicative, so you would get 15 on top of 15 on top of 15, so it was like 52% increased damage and not 45, and that made it better when you ran it against Striker because it was up above 50% and Striker could stack to 100%. Like, you see where I'm going with this. The game has more mechanics in it, but it is less complicated. It's something that can be, used in a way where players can augment their playstyle. They can boost their build in different ways. They can differentiate themselves. And it is more complicated in the amount of usable things, less complicated in the redundant or overly complex or irrelevant things. To really boil it down, I guess, Division 2 has a great many more mechanics available to players, a great many more traits or stats or everything like that. But those talents and those traits and those stats are a great deal less complicated than the previous ones. So whether or not that makes the game more casual, I guess is up to the individual, but the game really is not heavily casual, and it's not casualized, because when you're emphasizing squad play and team dynamics with a greater number of relevant choices, as opposed to having 50 choices that are useless and 2 choices that are amazing, like Division 1, which is undoubtedly and unarguably the case. You have 1 or 2 things that are so far above the others that there's no point in running all the other things. Division 2, if they can stray away from that, which is obviously the intention, then they will have a greater number of things that are relevant, though those things themselves are going to be a bit simpler. They're not going to have all these complex equations. So I don't know whether or not that makes it more casual. I disagree that it's casualized, but that's up to the community member to interpret. I just wanted to weigh in on the discussion because it seems like a lot of people are either against Division 2 because of the proposed changes, or for Division 2 because of the proposed changes. But within the community that is against it, it seems like they have 2 very, very heavily exclusive points of view. One point of view is that it's too complicated and too hardcore, and the other is that it's too simple and too casualized. And that doesn't really work. I mean, when you have 2 groups that are against something for those, polar opposite reasons, something's wrong. Whether it's the way the information is being displayed, the way it's communicated, the way it's received, I don't know, but there's a disconnect somewhere. What do all of you think about Division 2? Do you think it's too casual? Do you think it's too hardcore? Do you think it's too complicated? Do you think it's too simple? Do you think they've eliminated the wrong mechanics and replaced with the right ones, or whatever? Who knows? What do you guys think of the experience overall? Personally, I think that as a content creator, it's a dream come true, because there's going to be a lot more relevant combinations of gear, of talents, of weapons, of gear sets, of gear brands, all that stuff. I'm going to be able to combine all of those things in many more ways than I was able to in Division 1. And even then, in the original Division, I got to do a lot of that type of content, so I was a very, very happy creator. But in Division 2, I'll be able to do even more. So it's a good thing for me in that regard. But what do you guys think? Why is some of the community interpreting this as way too casual, and thus they won't buy it? Another section interpreting it as way too hardcore, and thus they won't buy it. And how can those 2 groups exist? I guess what it really must come down to is a disconnect on a personal level. But I'm interested to hear the community's thoughts. This is a little bit different than my previous Division 2 content. This really is a rant and just a discussion piece, more so than anything else. It does not have to do with information and getting you guys to think and communicating things that have just been talked about or announced. None of that. But hopefully still had some value to some people, because the channel's really heavy into Division 2, or will be, and it's heavy into Division 1, or was in the past. So I figure it was relevant, but let me know in the comments. As always, there are links down below if you want to support the channel, a bunch of different ways. You can join our gaming forums, you can join our Discord server. I do live stream on Twitch, not all that often, but if you really like watching live broadcasts, check it out, drop a follow. I'll probably live stream again pretty soon, and then I'll definitely be diving hardcore into a couple of different games that are coming out fairly soon in the advanced section of time before Division 2. But anyways, check out those links. You can bookmark the Amazon affiliate link if you want to just support the channel for free, or subscribe with Twitch Prime. There's a bunch of free ways down there to support Upper Echelon if you're into that. But I'll stop it there. Enough money talk and enough community development talk. We'll chop it. As always, thank you for watching, and have a nice night.